wanted to inquire about the organics, the chance that organic marijuana could be certified. They had genuine concerns that their patient was immunocompromised, and they had genuine concerns that their patient was being exposed to pesticides, and by smoking the marijuana for the purpose of relieving these symptoms, they could actually be causing more harm. Well, you know, they kind of caught us flat-footed. We'd never been asked that question before. We are responsible for registering organic crops in the county, grapes, pears, and otherwise. So as all these questions began to mount up in terms of the conflict between state and federal law and what exactly our role was with this underground agricultural industry, is what it boils down to. It's a complete agricultural industry that's underground. So we had to clarify what our role was, where our authority stopped and started, and so my boss wrote a letter to the California Department of Food and Agriculture kind of going through what the litany of problems that this presented. I'll try to cover all the bases, but just as an aside, we are also the sealer of weights and measures, so that issue had come up too. This was back when we had several dispensaries in the county. We are required to test and seal all scales and measuring devices over which commercial transactions take place. We were being asked to test scales at clinics. And so we had this big, my boss, David Bengston, wrote a letter to the Director of Food and Agriculture with this long litany of questions. What do we do with these scales? What about the pesticide use issue? What about the organic status? So I actually brought I believe I have it here. The response was quite brief from the Department of Food and Agriculture. Let me see if I have it. It's so brief that I'll be able to read it to you here in just a moment. Dear Mr. Bengston, I read your January 21st, 2005 letter concerning marijuana grown in your county as a crop, pursuant to Proposition 215, asking for this department's advice as to the proper regulation, organic certification, and registration of the product and its stock. This department, and you as our agent, do not certify, register, etc. illegal activities. Either growing or sale of marijuana violates federal law, even the growth of one marijuana plant, and that is a federal issue, not one within the purview of this department or you. And that was signed by CDFA's chief counsel. So although it was a rather brief and terse response, we were somewhat satisfied that it was black and white. And from that point forward, it was pretty much hands-off for our department in terms of organic status and some of these other issues that had come up. That doesn't change the fact, though, that we still have the responsibility for regulating pesticide use. Any misuse of pesticides still falls under our authority, whether it's on marijuana, corn, grapes, pears, it doesn't matter. And we still have the authority and responsibility of investigating these pesticide illnesses. But in terms of the organic status and so forth, that we were told basically to keep our hands off. And one thing you'll note with many of these agencies is they're dependent on federal funding, so they're really hesitant to get involved in a situation they think that could threaten their funding sources. So I have a lot more history here about how we've crossed paths with marijuana. A couple of just, we have, as Jim talked about, you know, a lot of these grows, they occur on agricultural land. So we've had a situation, I had a timber company have an extremely large grow on their property several years in a row. I know the sheriff's office, I believe it was last year, busted that. It was way up on Sherwood Road. There were 40,000 plants on this timberland property. They had tapped into a lot of the streams and tributaries on the property and were pumping water. I actually had a call from the forester because his crews have to go out, and they're the ones that are pulling a lot of these plants out. And it got to the point where it was a huge labor cost for him. So he actually wanted to spray the plants when they were in their juvenile stage because they were in their timber production area. And so I had to ask the Department of Pesticide Regulation, what about spraying these plants out? It will save them hundreds of hours of manual labor. And so that they were given the green light on that. But there is a problem with these operations encroaching on ag property. There's also been, I know, at least 1 or 2 operations that have been associated with vineyard operations, where they've actually found implements from the vineyard in the grow. Whether or not, you know, this was something that the workers were doing on the side, I don't know. That's probably, the sheriff could probably better answer those questions. So one of the issues that I see is with farm planting stock, all nursery stock, as it's called, is required to be inspected and found free of pests. That's so when a farmer plants his crop, he's starting with a clean crop. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned here is there's a big underground nursery industry here. All these plants, generally they're not started from seed anymore, they're started from cuttings. So that in and of itself is a big industry, is providing the plants to a lot of these growers. Well, in commercial agriculture, these wholesale nursery stock is inspected so that when it's planted in the farm field, it's clean, and therefore there's not a lot of pest problems to have to deal with. That's the law that we enforce, and we inspect all licensed nurseries in the county just for cleanliness of their stock. But that sort of a system doesn't exist with marijuana, and I think that's part of the problem is you have people selling these plants. A lot of times they're already infested in the small stages with mites or mildew or what have you. And whenever you put these sort of plants in an